Well, had I known somebody else here was in the audience, I probably would have ended with a little more eloquent lead-in, and I apologize for that, Congressman. It is my pleasure now to introduce somebody who also needs no introduction to this audience. Congressman Chris VanHollen represents Montgomery County, among other places, in the United States Congress. He has, I think as everybody here knows, risen to exalted heights in probably the shortest time of any member of Congress that I certainly know. And I could sit here and, without even having any paper, recite a lot of Chris's accomplishments, which are just really remarkable. I think probably for this audience in the Chesapeake Bay, there's not one man that gets more credit for changing the face of agriculture in the Chesapeake Bay than Chris VanHollen. We all talk about the Farm Bill amendment to the Chesapeake Bay. Well, that author of that was none other than Chris VanHollen. He is the man that spent all of the time, the shoe leather, going from House to Senate, dealing with the Ag Committee, dealing with leadership, and making that bill happen. It's not a very pretty process, and one that Chris deserves all of our thanks in making happen. But the one story I want to tell about Chris, I'm sorry, Congressman VanHollen. I had the pleasure of meeting the congressman when he was a staffer for then Governor William Donald Schaefer in the Hall of States on North Capitol Street in Washington, D.C. These were very heady times. This was right after the Alaska oil spill, and we were working together to try and craft an effective response from the National Governors Association. And Chris turned to me and some other colleagues and told us that he was going to be running for the House of Delegates and the Maryland State General Assembly, and wanted to know if this is something that we could all help him with. And it didn't take long for us to talk with our environmental colleagues and realize that we would have a true champion for the environment in Chris VanHollen. And we have worked, of course, closely with him ever since. But I think the important thing of this story is that the year then, I believe I was going to say was 1987, 1988, which in the grand scheme of things was not really that long ago. And this was a gentleman who was then deciding to run for the House of Delegates. He then ran for the state Senate. He then ran for the Congress in some incredibly difficult races. And here's a man who has risen up to a leadership position in the United States Congress in that short period of time. And it's all because this is a man who cares deeply about what he does every day for the people of his district and the nation. Congressman.
Well, thank you very much, Chuck, for that very warm, very generous introduction. And by what Chuck said, all of you know that Chuck Fox has been somebody who's been working on the Chesapeake Bay for a very long time. We were both working at that time. As he said, I was in the Washington, D.C. office of Governor Schaefer. For those of you who remember Governor Schaefer, you know that those of us who worked in the Washington, D.C. office did it because we were out of throwing range of fast-flying objects. But at that time, Chuck had already been very immersed in the Chesapeake Bay issues. The director of our Washington office under Governor Schaefer was Monica Healy, who had worked on the Chesapeake Bay issues with Senator Mathias before that. And it was a great period of time, and I think that the successes that we've seen over the years, and all of us recognize that with the Chesapeake Bay, you know, successes have been hard won, hard fought, and it's always a race against time and a race of development in the Bay. So it's a question of making sure that we continue to press forward one step at a time. But those successes, those that we've had, are in large part due to Chuck's effort. And in a very short period of time, he was able to elevate the Chesapeake Bay issue at the highest levels of the new administration under President Obama. So thank you, Chuck, for being the czar of the Bay. And we look forward to working with you in your new capacity. From the Bay to the oceans, we will continue to work together. This has obviously been a very difficult period of time, the last 36 hours, both for Congress, members of Congress, the institution of Congress, staff members on Congress, and for the country as a whole. I've had the great privilege of knowing Gabby Gifford since she was first elected in 2006. And she is a beautiful person. She's everything that anyone would want in a member of Congress. She's smart, she's energetic, she's caring, and she's the type of person that listens to all sides of an issue and makes up her mind, and even when she decides what course she wants to take is respectful of the views of others. And she's obviously in the thoughts and prayers of many of us in Capitol Hill and around the country. She's also a great champion of the environment, especially clean energy issues, and would always remind every one of us in Congress or colleagues that in the state of Arizona, they get 98% of the sunshine, sun shines 98% of the days of the year. And she was one of the true champions, in fact, the champion in the House in pushing forward on solar energy issues as part of a broader effort on clean energy. So tomorrow in the House of Representatives, we will have a resolution remembering those who died and reflecting on those who are injured but still fighting for their lives, and obviously Gabby continues to do that. So a very tough moment for all of us, but knowing Gabby Giffords, she would want us all to continue the fight on clean energy and on issues like the Chesapeake Bay. So thank all of you so much for what you have done for the cause of protecting the Bay. Some of you for a very, very long period of time. Some of you more recently, but all of you dedicated to the common purpose that brings us together. And I know that there's been a lot of changeover politically. I know it better than anybody. I was the chairman of the Democratic Congressional Campaign Committee. As the president has said, at least of us Democrats, we got shellacked in the last election, despite our best efforts. But it is we all of us, Republicans, Democrats, Independents alike, who care about the Bay, need to make sure that despite the change in power in the House of Representatives, that we continue to work together as individuals, as communities, and as states within the Bay watershed to press forward on these very important issues of the Chesapeake Bay. Now, all of you were very involved in the legislation that was introduced last year to help restore the Bay, and it was premised on pretty simple ideas, but powerful ideas, which is if we're going to continue to make progress on the Bay, we need to have very firm and concrete targets for cleaning up the Bay, and we need to make those enforceable. And the good news is, with President Obama in office and Chuck Fox as the czar, we were able to move forward on the TMDL front and put in place those specific targets that we now need to work so hard to implement. Now, obviously, enforcement, all of us know in this room that at the end of the day, enforcement is the key. And that is why it's important that we continue to press forward on that legislation. I know you heard from Congressman Cummings yesterday, and I'm confident that Senator Cardin and Congressman Cummings are going to reintroduce the legislation. I'm going to be proud to join with them once again, and we need to move forward. We all know it's going to be a big fight, and it is a fight that's gotten a little harder in terms of the legislative route. But that doesn't mean we shouldn't press on. If all of us who work on Bay issues gave up or became less, exhibited less urgency in many times in the past, the Bay would be in a lot worse shape than it is today. So we need to press forward. That legislation has already provided, as I say, that framework that was used by the administration in their executive order, and now we need to continue to press forward. Chuck mentioned the Farm Bill, and that was something we all worked on together as well. And I want to thank everybody in this room who was involved. Obviously, one of our key partners was the Chesapeake Bay Foundation. I see Will Baker here, Doug Siegland is here. Others in the room were very involved in that effort. Sorry, I can't see everybody, but that was really an effort of reaching out to Republicans and Democrats alike, and putting together a coalition that was successful at making sure that the Bay received its own specific mandated appropriation as part of the Farm Bill. First time we've been able to do that in a Farm Bill. The Bay continues to benefit from the different funding streams through national programs, but this was a specific Bay-focused effort. And the Farm Bill is going to be up for reauthorization in 2012, and we all need to work very hard to make sure we preserve the gains we made, because you can be absolutely sure there are going to be efforts to unwind the gains that we made. And as we talk about that bill, and Chuck mentioned the back and forth, the House and Senate, it's absolutely true. I do want to recognize Karen Robb on my staff, who's right back there, who just did a terrific, terrific job. We obviously need to press ahead on other fronts too. The stormwater management legislation and appropriations will continue to be a focus of ours through the Clean Water State Revolving Fund. As you know, in the budget climate we're in, we're going to have to work very hard to continue to make sure that that is a priority because stormwater remains a huge issue, not just directly in the Bay itself, but obviously into the tributaries that feed the Bay. And finally, the nutrient trading program that is within the legislation that has been introduced. If worse comes to worse, at least in the short term, and we're not able to get the full legislation passed, which has to remain our goal, getting the full piece of legislation passed, but there are also components of that legislation that we can work on in moving through the process. If the ultimate goal is not possible in the short term, we may be able to have some short-term gains on other fronts. Again, the main objective has to be to get the whole bill through, but we need to come up with all sorts of scenarios that we can, as we move forward here. So I just wanted to come by. Just came from the Capitol, where we're planning tomorrow's remembrance service for those who died, and the resolution urging on those like Gabby Giffords who are still fighting for their lives. But this is a very important cause that you're all united in, preserving the Chesapeake Bay for all the reasons that we love the Bay, many of which Chuck referred to. But it really is our opportunity here to continue this fight that so many have carried on. And we cannot allow sort of the political winds that blow back and forth to take us off course. We have to be absolutely steady as to what our goals are, unflagging in our efforts, and this is the group that I'm confident will make sure that as we work together to accomplish that very important goal. So thanks for what you've done, and thanks for what you're going to continue to do to preserve and restore this beautiful national treasure which we call the Chesapeake Bay. Thanks.